welcome to NewsNation, where our suspicions have been confirmed. The answer to why the government is saying things about the drones that don't make sense is because they cannot make sense of everything that's out there. Just like during the pandemic, they don't like telling us that they don't know things. It's about a lack of transparency and accountability for the same. Why? Part of it is because people want answers and a sense of security, even when the government doesn't have them. Part of it is arrogance and covering that arrogance with inadequacy. Remember with the pandemic, the shift from no masks and cleaning everything to needing masks and distance. Then it was what worked best for school-age kids. Then the efficacy of the vaccine and each new variant. And now the reality of long COVID and long vax injuries. Each and all, they knew, they weren't sure, so they didn't tell us what they could tell us at the time. And people got ahead of where the government was, and that's never good. The situation changed, and they were behind. And the messaging became problematic. Same thing with the drones. Now, luckily, this doesn't matter as much, at least not yet. But here's the truth. The government can't say there is no threat because they can't really assess the situation. Drone tech has moved faster than law enforcement and even federal agencies. Yes, they have drones. Yes, they have detection capabilities that are even better than what they've ever disclosed, but not enough or good enough to catch or even confirm what so many of you see on a regular basis. So here is the state of play. Despite the White House and the Pentagon repeatedly saying these mystery drones, nothing to worry about, they can't know that. And today, a group of bipartisan lawmakers were briefed in a classified closed-door meeting. You got to ask, if there's nothing to worry about, why did the briefing have to be classified? There could be good reason for that or not. So what did they learn or not learn? Joining me now, two members of the House Intelligence Committee who were in that meeting. Republican member of Congress Dan Crenshaw and Democrat Congressman Amy Barra. Now, yes, you got a Republican and a Democrat. You know why? Because people care and it goes beyond party. Thank you both, gentlemen, for being with me tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Son.
Does anything that I said so far offend either of you in terms of what you understand about the situation? Am I okay with?
I'll go first. Nothing offends me. I think we've got to be transparent with the public. Obviously, there's concern. There's a lot that we know, a lot that we don't know. Nothing in the briefing, though, at least from my perspective, and I'm curious to hear from Dan, gave me cause for concern. I think the FBI takes this very seriously. I think local law enforcement takes it very seriously. But, Chris, as you talked about, the proliferation of drones, folks that are hobbyists, et cetera, there's a lot that we need to do as Congress to get ahead of this. But, again, right now, if I was in New York, New Jersey, I wouldn't be worried about what we're seeing right now. But, again, I think we've got work ahead of us in Congress.
Listen, I get it. I accept it. Dan, the question to you is, I'm not worried about some Iranian mothership or little green men or anything like that. I don't like that the government doesn't seem to have a handle on it and suggesting they do. Am I wrong to feel that way based on what you were briefed on?
Yeah, no, I think your monologue was correct. I mean, the government has a tendency to try and put on this display of 100% certainty, when in reality, they're not sure. And, it's okay to tell the American people sometimes, hey, we're just not sure. We have no evidence that there's a threat, and that's true. There is no evidence that there's any kind of threat from any kind of foreign actor or that there's even a domestic threat. But as you said, they don't actually know that for sure. It's impossible to know that for sure. And you know what? That's okay. It's okay to say that. People can handle some elements of truth. Because if you make these absolutist statements, and you mentioned COVID a lot, COVID was chock full of absolutist statements. And that's what drove people crazy, because people aren't that stupid. And so they could see, well, okay, there's a caveat to what you just said, and so now I don't trust you. Now, with respect to drones, I think what I took away from that briefing, most of all, and I think a lot of us did, was we just simply don't have a good legal framework to deal with this. This is a new technology. It has transpired much quicker than a lot of us are ready for. We do have really good counter-drone technology and ways to deal with this, but we're talking about forward operating bases at this point. We're talking about protecting our U.S. forces abroad. When it comes to hey, just some random buildings in New Jersey and there's drones flying all over the place, it's not obvious who the lead agency is. It's not obvious who you call. Who do you call? And what countermeasures are actually allowed to be used, legally allowed to be used? So Congress has a role here. We need to develop that. There are some bills that are out there that get at that a little bit. I think we need to go a lot further. There's now an appetite to do so, which I think is good. Somebody needs to know they're in charge, whether that's DHS or the FBI. And then there has to be some actual looking at, okay, what are the technologies we want to use to say, maybe have the option to take down these drones. Maybe it's RF jamming, maybe it's capturing them, maybe it's shooting them down. Whatever the case may be is, we have to actually look into that. And at the state and local level, they need those same capabilities. Because, look, these are cars flying in the sky.
Right.
And you can attach a lot of things to them. They can be dangerous.
So, Congressman Bera, the idea that, they're out there at night because they want people to know that they're looking for misplaced weapons of mass destruction and loose nukes. Was that put to rest at the briefing?
I feel pretty comfortable that that's not what they're doing right now. I agree with everything that Dan said. There's this technology is moving faster. We're going to see more drones in the future. Amazon talks about delivering packages via drones. So, this is where Congress, in a bipartisan way, needs to legislate, figure out what the right way to do this is. Do we mandate and regulate that you've got to have radio frequency? So if there is something out there, we can quickly identify what it is and say, okay, that's an Amazon drone versus, a rogue actor. And, this technology is moving fast. We've got to move fast as Congress. And, the body, unfortunately, isn't designed to rapidly legislate. But I think this is a wake-up call.
Dan, do you agree with that? Do you think that there's enough energy that when the Congress convenes after the holidays and it's the new Congress, that this will be something that people will want to act on? Or is there any special interest in here we should know about?
To be honest, it's a little bit of an unfortunate timing. I mean, we're getting the CR done this week, and then everybody goes on break, and this news story will be gone. But it is something we're going to deal with. We're not going to forget about it. So, the Homeland Security Committee, I think, should be the committee of jurisdiction that deals with this. I personally believe this should fall within DHS's authority, along with the FBI. This is not a hard problem to solve from Congress's perspective. There needs to be obvious criminal charges in place if you misuse drones, which, by the way, that don't exist right now. I mean, this is a problem.
Right.
And there needs to be an obvious lead agency that has a tasking and funding to get counter-drone measures and partner with local and state law enforcement when those need to be put in place. Like right now, a drone flies overhead a soccer stadium, everyone's pointing fingers at each other, not knowing who to call. That's a problem. All right, so that just requires leadership from the top. That's not a hard problem to solve.
I got to tell you, I love everything about this segment. I love seeing you guys. I love that there was no ego. I love that it's not about the party. I love that it's about action. It's like an early Christmas present to me from you two guys. So thank you very much. Dan Crenshaw, you're always welcome here. Congressman Barris, the first time I've had you on, you're always welcome too. It's great to have people who are willing to do something for the rest of us on the show. And I wish you both the best for the holy days.
Great. Be well.
All right. Take care.
Chris. Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to be with both of you. Look at that. Democrat and Republican, same pages, just want to make it better for us because they don't have the legislation they need to give us the answers that we should be able to get. And that's what it is. Not some guy saying it's loose nukes and some podcaster saying, sounds like it makes sense to me, and it gets 20 million views and everybody's talking about it. Transparency, accountability, government action, and regulation, we're warranted. Bravo. 4 minutes and 5 seconds. Coming up. Now, here's the opposite end of the spectrum. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, okay? He's got this stain on him for the Trump suits. Now he's dealing with a no-brainer. Formal charges being brought against the 26-year-old assassin accused of murdering the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. Bragg laid out something that is worth reviewing. We now have a timeline that shows exactly what this was about and what the assassin's family knew. The suspect has a big shot New York lawyer. Is there a defense? What could it be? It's a little deeper than many might expect. I'll tell you why next.
Lightning, well-planned, targeted murder that was intended to cause shock and attention and intimidation.
All right. DA Alvin Bragg at a press conference today, charges formally brought against the 26-year-old accused of assassinating the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson just 2 weeks ago. And he's accused of it because he did it, okay? A grand jury has charged the suspect with one count of first-degree murder, which is interesting in New York and connected to terrorism. We'll talk about it. 2 counts of second-degree murder, which is weird because only one person is dead, but we'll discuss that. And additional charges for how this was done and what happened. Now, all of it together is going to put him away forever, between the weapons charges and the fake ID and, of course, the terror as an act of homicide. This is a big ticket. District Attorney Bragg released what really matters to us here today. The fact that they're charging this guy, obvious. What they're charging him with, pretty obvious. However, the timeline of the accused movements on the day of the murder, very interesting, because it shows what this was really about for this guy. Okay, so he gets in Manhattan about 10 days before the murder, checks into an Upper West Side youth hostel with a fake ID. Now we go to the day of the murder, okay? Wednesday, December 4, 5:34 a.m. The suspect leaves the hospital, travels to Midtown using an e-bike, okay? From approximately 5:52 to 6:45, the suspect walks near and around the Hilton Hotel, okay? So he was casing to see where this guy was. We kept asking, how did he know? How did he know? Okay, so 6:15, right? How did he know that the guy would be at a different area across the street? Because he was casing it. 6:15 a.m., he purchases a water bottle and granola bars at the Starbucks on 6th Avenue. You remember that. 6:38, 6:44, stands against a wall on the north side of West 54th Street, across from the Hilton, fully masked, hood up, like most of the bike messengers in the city. So it's not as suspicious as you think. 6:45 a.m., the suspect crosses the street to the Hilton Hotel, armed with a 9mm 3D printed ghost gun, equipped with a silencer, approaches Thompson from behind, shoots him once in the back and once in the leg. This is where they believe he left the shell casings that read deny, depose, and delay, okay? The third bullet at the scene that they found. Now, 7:12 a.m., less than 30 minutes after the shots were fired, Mr. Thompson is pronounced dead, of course, at Mount Sinai Hospital. Police then track the suspect's movements. He flees uptown on an e-bike, gets in a taxi, arrives at the George Washington Bridge bus station. From there, leaves the state. Now, as we know, he's arrested days later in Altoona, Pennsylvania, after being spotted at a local McDonald's. Police recover a 9mm handgun with a 3D printed receiver, 2 ammunition magazines, multiple cartridges, a homemade silencer, and the fake ID that he used at the hospital. The suspect was hired, so he needs counsel, right? You can get it for free or you can hire. This kid's got money. So he's got a high-powered former Manhattan DA turned defense attorney who also has a deal with CNN named Karen Friedman Agnifilio. Happens to be married to Sean Diddy Combs' lawyer. The question now, with a mountain of evidence against him, is what can be the defense? But also, is there any chance of any of his family being roped in on this? Now, probably not, mostly moral, but is there something there that needs discussion? Yes. Joining me now is someone who's worked many cases with the accused attorney, former Manhattan prosecutor and defense attorney, Paul Callan. Paul, what did you learn from what was released today that forwarded your understanding?
Well, it was a fascinating indictment in that they've turned it into the most serious crime you can commit under New York law. This murder in the first degree in furtherance of terror. By saying it's a terroristic murder, if he's convicted of that count, he's guaranteed a minimum of 25 to life with no parole. It kind of replaces what the death penalty used to be there for in New York. We don't have the death penalty in New York anymore, but that count's an important one because that'll keep him in prison for all of his natural life.
How is it 2 counts of second-degree murder? Is it different types of second degree, 1 count of each? Because there's only 1 deceased.
Yeah, I think they're viewing it as 1 count probably as if they can't say that it was a terroristic act, and they come down to murder in the second degree as a subunit of the first count, and the other is if they just go to that first. But I don't really understand it, because second-degree murder in New York is with intent to kill somebody, you kill them. That's what second-degree murder is. I don't know why you need two counts of it in the indictment. The truth of the matter is the max sentence is going to be 25 to life.
No matter what it is.
So it doesn't matter.
So what do they need to prove terroristic intentions, and do they have it satisfied by his own words in the scene that we're depicting in the middle of our two pictures right now?
Oh, I think the case that you laid out in your introduction shows that they have a slam dunk case of murder as an act of terror. The statute defines it as you committing a murder for the purpose of terrorizing a civilian population to do some kind of a political or ideological act, or to try to influence a unit of government with respect to a governmental policy. And by looking at his postings online and all of the things that he wrote, things that he said to other people, the DA has laid out a case that he killed Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, to try to influence health policy in the United States by this act of terror. So it's classic terrorism.
So now that before we get to the defense counsel and what would be their best case and what qualifies, she'd said on CNN in one of her hits, his only chance is to plead insanity. It's not that easy under New York state law in terms of what the insanity defense requires. We'll get to that. But first, did you hear the part about the family? So the family had reported him missing. The authorities call the family and say, hey, you said the guy's missing. Could this be the guy, this picture? They don't get back to authorities, but eventually give some type of communication that they could see, whether it was the mother or whoever it was, that they could see him doing something like that. Is there criminal exposure? Obviously moral exposure.
Well, is there criminal exposure for them not telling the police that that was their son in the half picture with him being covered by the mask? Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously they were able to recognize their own son in that picture, and they didn't identify him to the police.
But that he knew, that not that they knew, but they could see him doing something like that. How incriminating is that?
Well, I think you'd need more specifics than that. Were they just saying, my son was so sick, I could see him doing some crazy thing like that? Or did they mean, we knew he was planning this and we didn't do anything about it? There's a big difference between the two. One could be aiding and abetting in the murder. The other could just be a distressed mother talking about her son, who probably does have emotional or mental problems. And obviously he does have problems like that to commit an act like this.
Dusty's bringing up Ethan Crumley, the school shooter. The parents were charged, but they had so much detailed knowledge of his problems and interactions about his potential actions with school. None of that, we don't have the same fact pattern here. In terms of what his defense could be, you say he has problems. Under the law, you can be bad and not sick. What do you know about this lawyer's ability to pull off this defense, and what would it require under New York law to be not guilty by reason of insanity?
Well, he has a very good, talented lawyer. She worked for the Manhattan DA's office for quite a while, rose to one of the top positions in the office, chief assistant. So he's got a talented lawyer representing him. But she's got to deal with the facts of this case. And frankly, she doesn't have any facts to sustain an insanity defense. Very hard in New York. It's not because you have problems. It's not even because you have some mental problems. That's not insanity. In New York, you have to prove that you didn't understand the nature and consequences of your act, or that the act was wrong. And when you have a situation where there's extensive planning, that throws it right out the door. He obviously knew the nature and consequences of his act. He picked a gun that looked like it had a silencer on it even as his weapon of choice. He stalked Brian Thompson. He planned this very carefully, and he knew he was murdering Brian Thompson. So he knew the consequences of his act was murder. So he has no chance to prove insanity. That's for somebody who is so mentally disturbed they don't know what they're doing. He knew what he was doing.
What about jury nullification. For you at home, that means that even though the facts wind up being reconciled the way Counselor Callan is suggesting, one or more members of the jury decide, I'm not putting this guy away for what he did, which goes to the public reception. Yes, we've exaggerated it because we exaggerate everything that happens on social media as if it were vox populi of the entire nation, and it isn't. But in a recent poll, the younger you go, the higher the acceptance rate of what he did because of how they feel about the industry that the victim was part of. Do you think that could play into getting just one of the 12 to say, I'm not doing it, and hanging the jury?
Well, I got to tell you, I've practiced law in Manhattan, New York, for a very, very long time, and it's a borough of very diverse opinions, and it's a borough of a lot of opinions that lean way to the left, and opinions that are not friendly to major corporations, and particularly to corporations like United Healthcare. So I worry about jury nullification in this case. All you need is one juror slipping through saying, we have to send a message to the health insurers in this country that insurance costs too much, that people have suffered as a result of their profits. And then they vote no on the conviction. Then you're going to have a hung jury on your hands. So that's a legitimate worry for prosecutors to have in this case, that he'll be turned into some kind of an ideological hero fighting for people's health insurance. In fact, he's a cowardly nut who, look at what he did. He didn't even have the courage to face the guy he was shooting. Right. He shot him in the back. He's a coward. And that's the only message that I see in this action.
Yeah, look, I don't think he's a nut. I think he's a bad guy who had delusional ideas that didn't even apply to his lived experience, to use his own phrase. This is a guy whose family made fortunes off of, and I mean that, fortunes multiple times off of the healthcare industry. That's how he was able to live his best life in Hawaii. Counselor Callan, only one other question. Do you think he testifies in his own defense?
I don't think he would testify in his own defense. But remember, that's a decision that's reserved to the defendant in a criminal case. Yep. The lawyer can say to him, you're crazy, don't get on the stand. Hey, he was the valedictorian at his high school. He went to the University of Pennsylvania. He's obviously a reasonably bright guy. He may think that he can give some kind of a speech that'll convince the jury that he's a social hero and they should cut him a break.
But in doing that, he will completely invalidate any of her efforts to paint him as suffering from disease or defect. And it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting.
Remember, and even when I use the word nut, being a nut is not enough to win an insanity defense in New York.
Right.
You have to be somebody who doesn't understand what they're doing. This guy planned it, understood it, and he has no legitimate insanity defense.
Right. The McNaughton test is what they're still using in New York. Paul Callan, thank you very much. Appreciate you. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Up next. So I'm coming at this story different. You have heard that someone connected to Bobby Kennedy wants to get rid of the polio vaccine, right? The New York Times did a big piece on it, went all over the place online. Lawmakers coming out, they'll see this is who this guy is. This is who Bobby is. This is who he hangs out with. I don't think that's a fair representation of the situation. And I think that the person who is behind the application should be given the chance to explain what the application is about, what Bobby's involvement is about, and what they really want. And they are here next to do exactly that. The New York Times published an article titled, "Kennedy's Lawyer Has Asked the FDA to Revoke Approval of the Polio Vaccine." And in the piece, they highlight that attorney, Aaron Siri, in 2022, petitioned the FDA on behalf of another client, not Kennedy, to revoke the most widely used polio vaccine called IPOL, I-P-O-L. And after the story broke, huge pile-on, massive echo chamber, and it worked. Even Senator Mitch McConnell, who is not looking to be relevant right now, and a polio survivor himself, said efforts to undermine public confidence in the polio vaccine aren't just uninformed, they're dangerous. Anyone seeking the Senate's consent to serve in the incoming administration would do well to steer clear of even the appearance of association with such efforts. That's a shot right across the bow of Bobby. President-elect Trump sees no issue.
I think everything should be looked at, but I'm a big believer in the polio vaccine, the Salk vaccine. I think you're going to find that Bobby he's a very rational guy. I found him to be very rational. No, nothing, you're not going to lose the polio vaccine. That's not going to happen.
Well, even Trump there is characterizing it as this is something Bobby is behind. Is that fair? Joining me now is the attorney who filed the petition, Aaron Siri. Counsel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Is the headline accurate? You want to revoke approval for the most used polio vaccine?
No, Chris, that's not accurate at all. First of all, I don't want to revoke the approval of any vaccine. That was a petition filed on behalf of my client, the Informed Consent Action Network. It only related to the licensure of a single polio vaccine called iPol that was licensed in 1990. That means it's not the Salk vaccine, it's not the Sabin vaccine, it's a brand new technology vaccine, and it only sought to do so as to its licensure for children until a proper clinical trial was conducted. And as to children, there are 5 other licensed polio vaccines. The polio vaccine is given to children at certain intervals, and there are other licensed vaccines for those intervals. The reason my client filed that petition is that this particular new technology polio vaccine was licensed based on 3 days of safety review in its clinical trial after injection. That might sound incredible, I know, but if you go to the FDA website, you can pull up the clinical trial documents, and you can see that it was licensed based on 3 days of safety review after injection. And understand, this is, like I said, this is not the polio vaccine of old. This is not, as President Trump just said, the Salk vaccine. This vaccine was created by growing polio on chromosomally modified monkey kidney cells that were rendered effectively cancerous, immortal. They would grow for forever.
And the concern is that there'd be shed.
This is an entirely new product.
I get it. But a couple of points of pushback.
Well, it's not that they would be shed. It's not that they would be shed.
Go ahead.
Actually, they'd end up in the vial. This vaccine actually doesn't stop transmission at all, by the way. It doesn't shed because it's injected into the arm. It doesn't actually stop transmission. According to the CDC, the WHO, the Sabin vaccine would stop transmission. It creates immunity in your intestinal tract. This vaccine does not.
Well, then why would they have approved it?
Well, they approved it because it might reduce symptoms. Potentially, if you got infected, you could potentially have less symptoms if you contracted the virus. But it does nothing.
Right.
I mean, zero to actually stop you from it multiplying in your intestinal tract and you potentially transmitting it along.
Points of pushback. First, the client was ICAN.
Please.
ICAN. Founded by Del Bigtree. That's Bobby's guy. So it is Bobby, just by another name and another organization. Fair or unfair?
Unfair. Look, we represent a lot of clients. There's a lot of diversity of opinions, even within any movement, so to speak, right? Even within any particular environmental, folks who consider themselves environmentalists, they don't necessarily agree on everything. I have a client, ICAN. I've also represented Mr. Kennedy and other things. This was not on behalf of Mr. Kennedy. In fact, I never spoke once to Mr. Kennedy about this petition. He had nothing to do with it. It was only for ICAN. And ICAN also doesn't want anybody to be without access to a polio vaccine. They just want to get the FDA to do a proper clinical trial. And look, if the FDA even granted this petition, no adult would have been deprived of this vaccine because it wasn't even seeking review of this vaccine as to adults. And for children, I'll say it again, there were 5 other licensed vaccines for polio for children.
The company, the maker, says they have 6 months worth of data and that the 3-day may have satisfied that requirement, but they have plenty that proves it works well.
Yeah, well, then the FDA is misrepresenting information to the public because, the FDA has to publish by federal regulations on its website the pivotal trial, that's the technical term for it, that they relied upon to license that product. The pivotal trial on the FDA website says that the licensure was based on a clinical trial that reviewed safety for 3 days after injection. Now, if the manufacturer is claiming it has more data, I would love to see that. We FOIA'd the FDA actually for any other clinical trial data it relied upon to license this vaccine, that it otherwise has to support the safety of this product. All that information's on ICANN's website. If that data exists, I can tell you one thing, it's not in the hands of the FDA, and so it must not be that reliable. And the only place I've ever seen that supposed data reported was in the New York Times piece, and I can tell you how credible that piece is.
Did you tell the New York Times everything you're telling me right now?
Oh, the New York Times well knew they were going to be misleading the public. Look, we wrote the New York Times saying, hey, your whole article basically led the country to believe that if this petition was granted, nobody would access the polio vaccine. And you know that that's false. That's not true. And they wrote back, their general counsel wrote back and said that the article does not. I got the quote right here.
Go ahead, let me
grab it. Yeah, here's what they wrote back to me. Quote, it does not state, meaning their article, that Mr. Siri's actions would leave Americans without the choice to get vaccinated for polio.
Well, the headline says
so here it
the
is.
polio vaccine, and they justify that by saying this is the one that kids get the most. So effectively, you would be taking away the most commonly used protection.
Oh, well, by the way, I would love to see that claim that it's the most commonly used vaccine. When you go in, the polio vaccine is on the CDC schedule for 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, and 4 years of age, okay? When you go in, there are also other vaccines recommended at precisely those intervals. So the manufacturers created vaccines that include polio and, let's say, Hep B or another vaccine, so they have to give less injections. This way, when you go to the pediatrician to get a vaccine at any of those polio intervals, you're typically often getting not the IPOL vaccine, you're getting a combination vaccine. And so, again, the IPOL vaccine, the New York Times claims that may have claimed that, but I will tell you, I would love to see the data to support that claim. But critically, really critically, at the end of the day, the claim that the New York Times is making to the country, that everybody in the country believed that somehow this petition by ICANN, not Mr. Kennedy, had nothing to do with him, never discussed it with him, this petition would have left Americans without a polio vaccine. That claim is categorically false. They knew it was false when they published it. They intended the country to be misled, and that's what they accomplished. All of this is intended for one purpose. They're desperately trying to derail Mr. Kennedy's potential confirmation. And I'll tell you, if this is the best they could come up with, if the best they can come up with is a petition that was filed on behalf of somebody else, not Mr. Kennedy, that he didn't even know about, and then misrepresent what it was actually trying to accomplish, I mean, I'd say Mr. Kennedy is in a pretty good position, and they're doing a pretty bad job. But, you know, let me tell you, if I may, I can tell you why I do think it's important to what this petition was asking for, okay? It's important for the following reason. The outrage here should not be about what the New York Times is saying. The outrage here should be that the FDA licensed a product for injection into children based on a clinical trial that only reviewed safety for 3 days after injection. That's where the outrage should be. That should have been the New York Times headline, not the headline that they had. Most drugs are licensed based on multi-year placebo-controlled trials. Don't take my word for it. Go to the FDA website. Take a look yourself. You know,
but aren't they not allowed to do
companies?
Aren't they not allowed to do the placebo type trials on the kids? Isn't it found to be unethical because of their age and stage?
Only if placebo-controlled trials are conducted with children all the time. It's only considered unethical if there's an existing product that already treats that condition. Okay, for polio, in this instance, if they wanted to have done a placebo-controlled trial, they could have potentially done it because it was a brand new technology, but they could have at least used an existing polio vaccine as the control. In this clinical trial, there was no control. Meaning if they had an existing polio vaccine that they thought that they had determined was safe, yes, they could have used that as a control. But even if they used another polio vaccine as a control, Chris, even if they would have done that, you only have 3 days of safety data after injection. That's useless to determine safety. You can't do that.
Are you going to keep the petition or are you going to withdraw it, Aaron?
It's not my petition, sir. I have a client, ICANN, and if they, you know, it'll be their choice whether they want to leave the petition in place. But look, I will tell you this. I could tell you this. ICANN did not file that petition in order to get the FDA to actually withdraw the vaccine. When it was filed in 2022, they never thought for a moment the FDA would require that. It's just a legal tool. It's the legal mechanism by which to get the FDA to review the clinical trial. That's all they really want. They just want the FDA to require proper data. ICANN does not really want, and nor do they ever expect the vaccine to be withdrawn. This is about choice. It's about informed consent. That's the point. That's the focus.
Understood.
Right? And the problem here is that just super quick. The problem here is that in 1986, if I may, in 1986, the National Childhood Vaccine Act was passed by Congress to give immunity to vaccine makers for any injuries caused by their vaccines. At that time, there were only 3 injections in the first year of life. That's it, according to CDC schedule. We're now up to 29 injections in the first year of life.
And they have the same protection.
So all of those vaccines that came on, and they have the same protection. Yeah. All those vaccines that came on during the last, since 1986, including IPOL, this is why the clinical trials and doing proper controls are so critical. We've gone from under 13% chronic health disease in America among children to over 50%. I'm not saying vaccines cause all those, but we gotta rule that out, and that's why clinical trials are so critical.
I appreciate you coming on and making the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aaron Siri, I'll talk to you again. 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Now you can make a judgment about it, not just from that headline. Donald Trump won the election handily. So why is he suing so much? Why is he suing Iowa for their poll? Why is he suing ABC? Why is he suing everybody? Let's talk about that, okay? 2 men who know the player and the game, Corey Lewandowski and the legend himself, James Carville. Do we want no more lawfare? Only the lawfare that works for us. Next. The rule for thee, but not for me, question mark. I am back with 2 great political minds. Trump's senior advisor, Corey Lewandowski, legendary Democratic strategist, James Carville. Good to see you both. Corey, lawfare is bad. We want less of it. Stop prosecuting your opponents until you get in power and can do the same. Is that what we're going to see here in the next Trump administration? Him chasing after everybody who went after him?
No, Chris, we're not going to see that. What we're going to see is a blindfold back on Lady Justice where it should have been the whole time. And what we've seen from this administration is going after people because of their political beliefs. We saw that whether it was the Russia hoax narrative that we saw or under this administration, Alvin Bragg's and the Department of Justice going after Donald Trump. Never in the history of our country has a former president's home been raided and had the FBI come in and go through the candidate's personal effects and the missus' personal effects. This could have been done very differently. And now that justice is going to be restored, we're going to have Pam Bondi as the attorney general who's going to prosecute people based on the criteria that they committed a crime, not their political beliefs.
All right. So then, James, do you think you will be surprised if they go after the January 6th investigators?
No, not at all. And by the way, Donald Trump has, I don't know how many millions of dollars of judgments against him right now being successfully sued before, in addition to having 34 felony counts hanging over his head. So, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I remember a time, Chris, maybe you can remember this, when Republicans used to be against frivolous lawsuits. Now they're embracing. So, we're just going to go through this, and we'll see where it goes.
But, Corey, here's the suspicious part. I'm all fine with what you said. I think Pam Bondi is a ginormous step up from the original pick. But you're going after the Des Moines Register for a poll that you didn't like, where Seltzer got it wrong, okay? You went after ABC and they settled, which I was shocked by. And, you're going after media people who put out stories you don't like. Is that really the best use of the new administration's time?
Well, listen, Chris, we're not in the administration yet, but I will tell you this. The fact that ABC News settled, not only did they settle, they didn't settle with a non-disparaging clause in there. They had to make it a public apology for what they said.
Yeah, I was very surprised.
What they said was completely wrong. It was completely inappropriate. And they sued and they lost $15 million to the Trump Foundation, I guess the presidential foundation for this. So, look, you have to hold people accountable because that's what the media has done to Donald Trump for many years. Chris, you've done it. And it's fine to hold public figures accountable when they're wrong and they say something wrong. But the converse of that is also true. When the media grossly misrepresents the truth, they should be held accountable. And that's what happened in this case of ABC News.
James, what happens if you have people in power who sue the media when they report stories they don't like?
Well, I got to admit, I'm a little dumbfounded, and you're there. You know perfectly well that the E. Jean Carroll civil verdict was rendered. Judge Lewis Kaplan said in the common parlance of the word, that Trump raped E. Jean Carroll at Bergdorf Goodman.
The judge used the word.
Pointed that out.
But that is not the specific.
There was actually a court of law in a competent jurisdiction where the judge actually said that. Is that true or not?
It is true. He did say it, and he qualified it, and the actual counts aren't called that, and there is a legal distinction, but the judge did say it.
I'm just saying that's what the judge said. I'm not saying anything. I'm repeating what a highly experienced federal judge said after a jury verdict.
Then why do you think they settled?
We just can't suspend facts.
I got you. I'm with you. And George is a friend of mine, so I'm here to give him the benefit of the facts. But why do you think they settled, James? Do you think it's because they're worried about having Trump on their bad side?
ABC News is owned by Disney, which has a gazillion interests in a gazillion other things. They got a dinner with the chief of staff, and I have no idea. You have to ask the Disney people. They're the people that did this, but I can't tell you. But I can tell you what Judge Kaplan said, and you can tell Corey what Judge Kaplan said.
No, Corey knows.
I know that's what he said.
Corey knows. Look, you guys talk about mandate a lot, Corey, and the election was a grievance election about prices and the cost structure of society. And I got to tell you, I want you to help me understand the change in President-elect Trump's vernacular when he talks about cost structure. It was, we're going to lower food, we're going to lower gas, we're going to lower all that. Now he says it's very hard to lower those things. What happened? What happened? He won an election? All of a sudden he can't do what he said he was going to do?
No, look, what the president has said on the campaign trail and what he's going to do is within a year, your energy costs will be down 50% because we're going to drill, baby, drill. That's what stopped here. Look, people are paying too much at the pumps. They're paying too much for their fuel because of the fuel prices. So let's give it some time to get in the door and fix the problems.
You absolutely deserve the time, and people should reserve judgment and watch what you do, and even watch what you do versus what he says. I'll even give you that allowance, and we'll check back in on a regular basis. Corey Lewandowski, thank you. James Carville, always a pleasure. I love seeing you in front of that Christmas tree.
There you go. Merry Christmas.
Merry
Christmas, James.
You're like a gift. We'll be right back.
Man. Take care.
Kids, this video I just saw of what's in Takis, Takis, Anyway, so transparency, accountability. That's why I'm sending that video. Look, I see the comments. You have to learn to not get angry with everything that questions your stated position. The New York Times did a headline that was at a minimum unfair, okay? The lawyer laid out his case. I tested it with the obvious propositions. Now you get to decide. The same thing with Trump and lawfare. The same thing with the government not saying what it could tell us about what it doesn't know about drones. We got to play it straight on all sides. That's how we get better.